Welcome to this week's episode of Insight. During this week's show, we're going to spend the entirety of the show covering and analyzing the Prime Minister's very long press conference from this last Saturday, in which most of the primary topics were focused on foreign policy.
We have 17 articles in the latest draft of the peace treaty. 13 of them, including the preamble, are fully agreed upon. Another 3 articles are comprised of more than 1 sentences. And most of the lexicon of these articles is also agreed upon. We offer the following to take all agreed upon articles and wordings and sign it as a peace treaty. Why do we find this possible? Because basically all fundamental principles of peace between Armenia and Azerbaijan are stipulated there. In any case, we or anyone else can't ever have the kind of peace treaty that would regulate all possible issues.
In analyzing what he just said, this is actually a very dangerous idea because if Ilham is allowed to sign something that is not a total package, what he's going to do is he's going to go to the world and claim, listen, I'm for peace, I signed something. And then he can use all the unsettled issues for all his future aggressions.
Լեռնային Ղարաբաղի լուծարման վերաբերյալ որոշումը ես չեմ ստորագրել.
I'm not the one who signed the order on dissolving Nagorno-Karabakh. On the contrary, before this order was adopted in Nagorno-Karabakh, a change of government took place there, which was encouraged and welcomed by well-known circles here in Armenia. I want to tell you an episode that happened a few months ago. I was visiting Vake, where a forcibly displaced woman from Nagorno-Karabakh approached me and asked, "Tell me honestly, how realistic is the matter of our return?" I gave her the same answer, that I can't lie, I don't find it realistic with the perceptions that some representatives of Nagorno-Karabakh are trying to represent the matter, for the same reasons that these same people signed the order on dissolving Nagorno-Karabakh and left it immediately.
Simply put, this is the Prime Minister's way of not taking his part of the responsibility for the disaster and the ethnic cleansing that happened in Artsakh last year. Let's take it point by point. First point, the Artsakh state dissolution was a completely illegal act because it was done by the threat of force during the commission of a larger crime, which was the genocide and the ethnic cleansing that happened in Artsakh last year. So it has absolutely no legal standing, and is actually quite offensive for the Prime Minister to use this to give credence to this criminality as any kind of a legal formal act. Secondly, the Armenian state has absolutely no say on the right of return of Artsakhis to Artsakh, because that is an international right, and Armenia has absolutely no say in that. They're granted that for all eternity by international law. What it is that we must do, we must sort of step back and look at how other countries approach this topic and what other countries do for their compatriots in what the world considers living across, not in their own territorial state. And there's plenty of examples of that. You can look at the Polish government that always speaks about the rights of the Lithuanian, the Poles who live in Lithuania. There used to be a large number of them. The Hungarian government always talks about the rights of Hungarians who live in Romania or live in Ukraine. The Turkish government always talks about the rights of the Turkoman who live in Iraq and stands up for them. And in Ireland, you see the Irish government who always speaks up and has always stood up for the rights of the Irish Catholics who live in Northern Ireland under British control. And if you go through all of these cases, we are actually, at this point, the only country that is not willing to speak about the rights of our compatriots who live across other international boundaries. And all of this, what's interesting here, all of these other cases that I gave, none of those people have been subject to ethnic cleansing and genocide in the way Armenians have. So we actually have a far better reason to speak up and stand up for their rights and actually to use every kind of legal instrument to fight for their rights, in our case, the ICC, which is available to us, than any of these other countries.
If the trilateral statements are the foundation, if we want to value the trilateral statements, we must read it from the first article and see who was supposed to do what that hasn't been done. We are very concerned about the issue of the prisoners, captives, and other detained persons. We are carrying out daily work in this direction, and understandably, this work is not visible, and this is the specificity of that work.
For the most part, this is not the case. The freeing of our POWs and hostages in Baku is not a very high priority for this government, because if it was a high priority, it would have actually been part of the so-called peace negotiations. And it makes you wonder, what kind of peace negotiations can you have in which the other side insists that after you sign peace, you'll still be able to hold, dozens of Armenians whose primary crime is being Armenian. So what kind of a peace are we talking about if that's the case? Now, we have to be careful with this, because there are certain parts of this government and certain individuals, especially within our diplomatic corps, that actually have pushed this issue very strongly as far as bringing up the issue of freeing the prisoners. And in fact, we have reports that the Prime Minister himself has raised this issue with various world leaders. So it is not something that is not on their agenda. It's just not on the top of their agenda, and it's not something that is particularly important. And I think what we're really looking at is what we don't have is this is not standardized. There's no standardized policy, and there's no standardized program that is working towards freeing our hostages. And you can sort of see comparisons to this as far as what the Israelis are doing, for example, in freeing all their hostages from Gaza. People have their pictures everywhere. This is like an international campaign, some of it coordinated by PR firms, many of them, in fact. And we can do all of these things, and this will all be helpful to put pressure on the regime on the entirety of all of its indiscretions. There are many, many more things that can be done, which our state is not doing. And frankly, it is leaving a very bad taste in people's mouths when you have a state that is not willing to fight for the rights of every single Armenian, especially if they are Armenian citizens, which in this case they all are.
Ինչպես ստացվեց, որ Ռուսաստանի Դաշնության քաղաքացիությունից Ռուբեն Վարդանյանը հրաժարվեց?
How did it happen that Ruben Vardanyan renounced his Russian citizenship? Who advised him or instructed him to take that step? Who sent him to Armenia? Who sent him to Nagorno-Karabakh? For what purpose? With what guarantees? What assurances? What promises? And who said, at the end, you know what? We do not really know him, who he is, because he is a citizen of another country. Do we want answers to these questions or not?
Let me first say, I think these comments are outrageous and offensive, and frankly below the dignity of any Armenian political leader with a position like our Prime Minister. But let's move on and talk about the specifics of what the Prime Minister was saying about Mr. Vardanyan, and let's go through them point by point. First one, he says that how did it happen that Ruben Vardanyan renounced his Russian citizenship? Well, if we go back in time when Mr. Vardanyan actually went to Artsakh, the big attack line on him by all of his distractors that he is some kind of a Russian operative or a Russian agent, and for him to give up his Russian citizenship and just have his Armenian one was actually a way to prove that not to be the case. The second part of the Prime Minister's question, and I'll read it, is who sent him to Armenia? Who sent him to Nagorno-Karabakh? For what purpose? And what guarantees, what assurances, and for what promises? In very crass political terms, what the Prime Minister is implying here is that Ruben Vardanyan went there as some kind of Russian operative, which if he actually was, he would not be in a prison in Baku. He would be in Armenia, with all the other Russian operatives, both from Armenia and Artsakh, living freely and safely here. So the fact that he's in prison is actually the best proof that that is not the case. Secondly, Ruben Vardanyan has always been an Armenian citizen. In fact, he was born in Armenia during Soviet times, and he's lived here for many, many years. Third point is, many people don't know this, but Mr. Vardanyan's grandparents are actually buried in Hadrut, so he's actually an Artsakhsi by origin. So it's not something that is amazing that he would prioritize or fight for the freedom of Artsakh. Or maybe in the case of he took our prime minister at his words. He took his words seriously when the prime minister went on social media and took a photo of himself in front of a banner saying, Artsakh is ours. And if you actually think about it more universally, maybe in his heart of hearts, he knows what all of us know, that Artsakh has been home to Armenians for 2,000 years, and thereby Armenian. And no government can change that fact. So the real question for all of us is not why Ruben Vardanyan was in Artsakh doing what he did, essentially doing his national duty. The real question is, where was everybody else? In conclusion, what is most offensive here is that these questions, many of the questions that the Prime Minister raised, are exactly the same propaganda lines that are used by the regime in Baku to justify holding many of our prisoners, and in this case, Mr. Vardanyan.
We're ready to start practical communications with representatives of Armenian community in Karabakh. And today, in front of Secretary Blinken, I told my Armenian colleague about that, but we can do it only when Russian citizen, criminal oligarch, person who was involved in money laundering in Europe, Vardanyan, is out of our territory.
This is happening at a time when we're actually getting real-time information and confirmation that all, if not all of our prisoners are being systematically tortured in the dungeons of Baku. The truth is, this is no time to be asking any questions. This is a time for complete national unity, to get all of our compatriots out of hell and back to their families and to their homes where they belong. Thank you for joining me in this week's episode of Insights.